US President Donald Trump has lauded talks between his representative in Moscow and Russia's Vladimir Putin as, quote, good and productive. That sentiment was shared by the Kremlin, who said the US Special Envoy, Steve Witkoff, was taking Russia's concerns about a truce proposal for Ukraine seriously. But Ukraine's President, Vladimir Zelenskyy, is accusing Putin of manipulating the peace process, suggesting he has no intention of agreeing to a ceasefire.
Volodymyr Zelenskyy thinks he can see right through Vladimir Putin.
Putin often acts this way. He doesn't say no outright, but ensures that everything drags on and that normal solutions become impossible.
Zelenskyy called Putin's response to the ceasefire plan manipulative and suggested Putin was hiding his true intentions.
Putin is afraid to tell President Trump directly that he wants to continue this war, that he wants to kill Ukrainians.
The Russian president had signalled his agreement to the plan at a meeting in Moscow with his Belarusian counterpart, Alexander Lukashenko.
We agree with the proposals to cease hostilities, but we proceed from the fact that this cessation should be such that it would lead to long-term peace and eliminate the initial causes of this crisis.
Putin says Ukraine only wants a ceasefire because it's losing on the battlefield and will use it to rearm. One recent development is in Russia's favour. It says it's recaptured the key town of Sudzha in its own Kursk region, which would take away one of Ukraine's bargaining chips. Ukraine accepted a US proposal for a 30-day ceasefire after talks in Saudi Arabia on Tuesday. The US says the ball is in Putin's court.
He put out a very promising statement, but it wasn't complete. And yeah, I'd love to meet with him or talk to him. We know where we are with Ukraine, and we are getting good signals outside of Russia as to where we are with Russia. And hopefully they'll do the right thing.
Trump has been pushing for a quick end to the war, which is now into its fourth year.
Mikhail Alexseev is a professor of political science at San Diego State University and joins us now. Good to see you, Mikhail. I wonder, do you agree with President Zelenskyy that Vladimir Putin is just playing for time here?
Well, I believe that he is more than playing for time. First of all, he has to say that he agrees with that proposal because he doesn't want to be portrayed or perceived by the Trump administration as somebody who is in the way of Trump's idea of bringing peace to the conflict. But on the other hand, when you look at the small print, all the demands that are there are pretty much the same as they were when Putin started the war, and they would be completely unacceptable to Ukraine. But my concern is, looking at the broader range of news reports, is that this negotiation and Putin's conditions may have to do also with Putin attempting to give a side deal to Trump, to give selective incentives to reopen Russia for business, to benefit from joint exploration of oil and gas, maybe from aluminum deals, from other mineral resources, and overall to send the message to Washington that it's more advantageous and profitable to the United States to rehabilitate Putin, do business with him, and put all the pressure on Ukraine to accept the complete package of Russian demands.
Right, let's pull on that thread a little more. Putin wants now to speak as a next step to Donald Trump directly. What do you think of that dynamic in light of what you've just said, and how that might affect the pathway to a ceasefire and onward towards peace?
Well, there is, of course, a whole set of considerations there. for Trump. The cost of doing business with Russia would be one concern. Also, the relative costs of benefiting from cooperation with Ukraine in the economic sphere versus with Russia. Domestic political considerations, because a lot of Republicans who may not publicly oppose Trump hold very strong views in support of Ukraine. And so that will be a complex decision. And also, I think for Trump, it would be very important to get Putin to make at least some major concessions that Putin doesn't seem to be inclined to make now, because otherwise it would look like the deal-making image, the deal-making strategy that Trump advocated would not be working.
Yeah, how can Trump handle a long list of conditions from Putin at this point, given those pressures that you talk about, when he's so desperate for a deal to be done?
Well, one concern in Ukraine, which I have not seen much discussed by various experts, but which is very strongly felt there right now, and which has, I think, to be taken into account, is that Trump may accept all or most of Putin's demands, give them to Ukraine, and if Ukraine doesn't accept them, basically accuse Kyiv and Zelenskyy of not wanting peace and cutting off, again, military support and other assistance.
Mikhail Alexseev, Professor of Political Science at San Diego State University. It's been great to talk to you. Thank you.
My pleasure.
Let's bring in Susan Stewart for more on this. She's a senior fellow and Russia expert at the German Institute for International and Security Affairs. Welcome to DW, Susan. President Putin's response to the idea of this 30-day ceasefire deal is a yes, but. Does that actually mean no?
Well, I think Putin has actually very little interest in a ceasefire, but he does have an interest in appearing as a constructive player to Donald Trump. And he doesn't want to lose the advantages that he believes he has now with Trump, who has in fact adopted the Russian narrative on many aspects of the war. So he wants to appear constructive, but in fact, he wants to see how much he can get out of the ceasefire and maybe how much he can prolong the period before it enters into force.
But given all of these preconditions from Russia, I mean, do they basically make a ceasefire impossible?
Well, what they do is make it almost impossible for Ukraine to now say yes under these new conditions. So I think Putin's tactic is to say, oh, we agreed to the ceasefire, but we have conditions. And then if Ukraine says, no, we don't accept the conditions, then it looks like Ukraine is the one who is not being constructive. And so a lot will depend on how Donald Trump and the U.S. respond to these demands by Vladimir Putin.
Meanwhile, of course, Moscow's military machine continues to press forwards. Zelenskyy says Putin does not want peace. Is he right there?
I believe he is right, because I don't see that it's in Russia's interest right now to end the war. They do have the advantage on the battlefield, and Putin continues to insist, as he has had put in the Russian constitution, that the four oblasts, Donetsk, Luhansk, Zaporizhia, and Kherson, are now Russian, not to speak of Crimea. So he wants to insist that all of these oblasts be given to Russia by the Ukrainians, which I think is not acceptable for the Ukrainian side. And it's also in Putin's interest, he believes, to go further. He hasn't given up on his goal of achieving control over Ukraine and then taking further steps with regard to NATO territory.
The US, of course, put a lot of pressure on Ukraine to agree to this truce. What kind of pressure can Washington apply to Moscow?
Well, I think the best pressure would be to continue to arm Ukraine and to do so in an even more significant fashion than has been done up until now. Because other measures such as sanctions won't have that much impact on Russia, at least not in the short term. Especially because the U.S. and Russia do not have that much trade with each other. So, in fact, putting pressure by supporting Ukraine even more intensively would be the best measure.
Back in 2014, 2015, ceasefire deals were signed between Russia and Ukraine, which were then violated by Russia. Is there anything that can be done this time to prevent the very same scenario from playing out again?
Well, it's very difficult. I think it depends on the type of verification mechanisms that would be in place. Essentially, we know that we cannot place our trust in Vladimir Putin because of these violations of the ceasefire previously. So the most important thing is to be able to show concretely when Russia has actually violated the ceasefire so that there are really no questions about this and the appropriate response can be made.
Susan Stewart from the German Institute for International and Security Affairs. Thanks so much for joining us here on the programme today.
Thank you.